Hey guys, it's Ahmad with Lead and Steel. Today we're taking an in-depth look at the AK-103. Stay tuned. So what is the AK-103? The AK-103 is a rifle part of the Russian AK-100 series of rifles that was destined for export, that is international sales. Varying calibers and features, most notably was the AK-103, which came with a folding stock and it was chambered in 7.62x39. It was the last AK that Mikhail Kalashnikov oversaw, the last Shelby, if you will. From a functionality and manufacturing perspective, internally and externally, it was practically an AK-74M with some minor tweaks to the manufacturing process. Now, the Russians did not want to reinvest millions of rubles back into remanufacturing an AKM for export, so they decided to keep the same tooling, and we'll get into that in a second here, but upsize some components and round some things out to accept that larger 7.62x39 and allow for a weapon system that has, some nice amenities like a folding stock and such. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, this rifle does not have a folding stock, and that's true for all of the rifles that we're going to be talking about today. We decided to keep things consistent with standard fixed stocks as the market currently supplies. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. So we've got a few rifles that we want to talk about today. Two of those three are American-made. One is brought to us by Palmetto State Armory and the other from Kalashnikov USA. The third rifle is going to be our gold standard, our benchmark. That is the Russian SGL-20. For those who don't know, these Russian rifles were imported for a few years before import was banned in 2014. They came in as sporterized Saigas with Monte Carlo style stocks, and then the company Arsenal out of Las Vegas tooled up and reconverted them back to standard military configuration with a proper buttstock, pistol grip, fire control unit, and front end including gas block and front sight base. So this is the gold standard to beat, and we'll see if these American offerings can do that. Enter the Palmetto State Armory PSA AK-103. Now, the nomenclature for Palmetto State Armory's rifle is kind of odd. You might browse their website and think to yourself, what is the GF3 versus the GF4 versus the AK-103 versus the AK-104? Just know that PSA had a few generations of rifles where they were kind of beta testing, right? The GF1 and the GF2, which were kind of crappy. The GF3 and onwards utilized a hammer-forged bolt carrier group, as well as a hammer-forged front trunnion, and that is crucial for an AK. Now, previously, domestic manufacturers skimped out on that critical manufacturing process, which kind of aligned the grain and the metal and make sure that there wasn't any deficiencies in the structural integrity of the substrate steel, and they instead opted for investment casting some of these high-pressure components that, ultimately led to catastrophic failures. Now, seeing that, Palmetto State Armory thankfully switched to hammer forging, and since then, we haven't had any guns blow up. So the GF3 is their basic rifle. That is a standard AKM with a 4150 button-rifled black nitride barrel. The GF4 and GF5 varieties include hammer-forged barrels, either from Palmetto State Armory's in-house barrel forge or FN Herstal's down the street, respectively. The AK-103 borrows many of the features from all of those, namely the GF3's hammer-forged bolt, carry, and front trunnion, as is shared with the GF4 and the GF5, but it has an FN hammer-forged and chrome-lined barrel, as offered in the GF5 AKM. And as we get into the details of this rifle, you'll realize that this thing is actually more AKM than it is AK-103. It's kind of dressing up as the part. Should be worth noting that the Palmetto State Armory PSA AK-103 comes in two configurations, a standard fixed stock variety, which is shown here, as well as a folding stock. We didn't stick with the folding stock model, as the folding stock is reminiscent of a standard AK-74, rather AKS-74, a 4.5 mil style folder. That is not what is present on the AK-103 side folding rifle. It's a slightly different stock and has some functional differences as well, so we decided to keep things consistent and stick with that fixed stock model. Enter the Kalashnikov USA KR-103. Now, Kalashnikov USA is a company that formed after the rebranding of Russian Weapons Company, as RWC Group, a few years back. Those guys used to import our Saigas out in Tullytown, Pennsylvania, and now they operate in Florida. It should be noted that they do not have a real connection to Kalashnikov concern in Russia. They are just marketing, Russian-based rifles that are manufactured stateside under the Kalashnikov name. Because of the trade embargo, I'm sure they are protected from any intellectual property claims. But regardless, this is an outstanding rifle on its own, as well as in comparison to the Palmetto State Armory, and we'll get into that. The PSA, the KUSA, just like the PSA, comes with a fixed stock. Standard pistol grip. I decided to add a few things to this rifle, which we'll disclose. But out of the box, it's going to look very similar to a standard AK-103 and identical to, frankly, the SGL-20 and SGL-21. Furniture compatibility on the KUSA KR-103 is exactly how it is on the PSA 103 as it is on the Russian SGL. That is any standard AK-74 or AKM buttstock, pistol grip, and handguards can fit, provided you have a file and a rubber mallet nearby. Now, in terms of the furniture that you see on here, it should be noted that the standard KUSA product does not come with plumb furniture as of mid-2021. I just decided to swap in my own furniture as well as a Magpul grip and an enhanced safety with a larger ledge, just because the standard safety that comes on this gun is just a standard AK safety that's a little harder to get to. Other than that, everything else is factory. So you might be thinking cosmetically between the KUSA KR-103 and the PSA rifle, they're pretty much the same gun. Let's start getting into the differences. I'm going to start with the trigger on the Palmetto State Armory rifle. It's their standard trigger that exists on most of their AKs, including their AKV and 9mm, as well as, the rest of the AK lineup. It's a smooth break. Doesn't really have a wall. Kind of like a rolling break. Feels a lot like a Tapco G2. And the let-off is strong, and, you can feel that the trigger has been reset. It's not super short, but, these are AKs, and it's certainly good enough. In terms of the KUSA KR-103 trigger, you have a two-stage trigger that's actually manufactured by Arsenal in Las Vegas. Remember those importers of the Russian rifles that we talked about? This is a two-stage trigger where the take-up goes up to a wall. There's some mush with the wall, and then the trigger breaks. Reset, very similar to the Palmetto State Armory rifle. Very strong, definitely lets you that the trigger is ready to go. I will say that because the trigger shoe is relatively thin, maybe some of the internal geometry of this fire control unit, when I fired this gun in the snow when it was super cold outside, I experienced a decent amount of trigger slap. Now, was that for every rifle? I'm not sure. This is just my particular example, and because of that, I'll be swapping out this trigger for a Tapco G2. Moving forward on the receiver with the Palmetto State Armory rifle, we have very good looking rivets, perfectly domed, no air gaps or anything in between that would give me pause while, dissecting this guy. The dust cover is a smooth dust cover. It's not a standard AKM or AK-74 dust cover, which is a good thing from a cloner's perspective. However, the sheet metal, the thickness of this dust cover is a little thinner than that on the SGL, as well as on the KUSA KR-103. Does that mean this is going to be weaker when it comes to like drops on rocks or something like that? I'm not sure. I haven't tried these out, but from a functional perspective, it seems like it's perfectly fine. In terms of the spot welds on the receiver, the spot welds on the PS AK-103 are very clean. They are not as pronounced as you might find on a Bulgarian AK or a Russian AK, but they are certainly consistent in their size and the way they look. The side rail is also straight on with the top line of the receiver, and I had no problems mounting an optic on the side of this gun. Sweeping to the other side of the gun, we have a enlarged and super easy to manipulate safety that's manufactured by PSA. I actually like this safety so much that I bought one for my KUSA KR-103 and dropped it right in there just fine. This is a really good safety. Now, in comparison to the KR-103, we have pretty ugly looking spot welds. If I had to fault this gun in terms of a fit and finish perspective, the spot welds on the receiver, they just don't really look the part of an AK spot weld. Now, I'm sure functionally they are okay and they do the job. As for the rest of the receiver and the rivet work is excellent, perfectly domed rivets, just like we see on the Palmetto State Armory and the Russian rifle. Nothing wrong from that perspective. And the side rail as well. No problems mounting optics to that guy, and it's also on there pretty straight. The dust cover on the KR-103 is thicker, like we talked about. Feels a little more substantial, and it reminds me of the Russian rifle. Now, what about magazines and magazine compatibility? Well, with the Palmetto State Armory rifle, we have a bit of an issue. That is, military magazines don't like this gun. That's as a result of the center support rivet in the receiver. This is made, sits right inside here, and it's made to, withstand or help the receiver withstand side load or pressure, and it's pushed a little too far forward to the front trunnion. And what happens is Some guns, or some magazines, excuse me, with a little more material behind the feed lips for added stability, namely steel surplus mags, military magazines, bolt hold open mags, we sell some by the way, Bulgarian Circle 10s and Bakelite mags, they don't work in this gun. You gotta really force them in there. Or you have to cut a clearance with like a Dremel or something inside of that center support rivet. Now, my recommendation would just be reach out to PSA and have them take care of it, because it's, you know, on them if you exhibit this particular issue. But the only real mags that I have that are commercial spec are the Bulgarian Circle 10 copies that are manufactured by PSA. These are steel reinforced in some spots, and they look like Circle 10s, and they lock in just fine. You know, they release just fine as well with that magazine release lever. Quick note about the PSA mags. They are a little problematic. In my right hand, we have a standard Bulgarian Circle 10 magazine. This is steel reinforced military magazine. Works just great in all of my AKs, com block or domestic, except for my PSA AKs, unfortunately. Here we have the PSA Waffle Mag. This comes with all of their AKs now as of mid-2021. Steel reinforced, just like the Bulgarian Circle 10. For whatever reason, the 30th round, that is your last round in the magazine when you're done firing, has this weird tension to it that allows it to kind of flop around in the PSA mag. Let me show you. So here's the Bulgarian Circle 10 mag, and here's a Vimpo round loaded in there. It is not moving. Well, it is once I really put some pressure on it, but it's not rattling around in there, and it's in there relatively tight. I can shake the magazine around, and that round's not going to go anywhere. The 30th round, however, in the Palmetto State Armory magazine, likes to rattle, and I can move it very easily with my finger. So, you know, I haven't had any malfunctions with that. I will say this magazine holds 31 rounds, so certainly something going on in this magazine. I personally wouldn't trust this thing for self-defense, but, you know, as a range mag, no problems at all. Quick note on the KR-103, no mag issues at all. Good to go. Now let's really get into the guts of these guns. Now, what is it that makes the Palmetto State Armory more of an AKM than an AK-103? Well, really, it's the bolt carrier group. The bolt carrier group on this unit is the same that's found in the GF3, GF4, and GF5 varieties, as well as some of the shorter AKPs that they offer. It is an AKM bolt carrier group, not an AK-103, so that includes a shorter internal extractor, larger or wider bolt stem, and a standard AKM carrier with slots in the front piston. Should be noted that the piston is screwed into place and then drilled and riveted as per AKM spec, you know, from that com block manufacturing era. Now, some guys might be thinking, oh, this is such a huge issue, you know, it's not a true AK-103, how can it be marketed as such? Well, realistically, from a functional perspective, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. And if I was Palmetto State Armory's CEO, I would do the exact same decision that was made for this rifle. That is, the tooling is already set up for an AKM. We already make tons of AKMs with good hammer forged bolts, and we don't have any issues for the vast majority of them. So if it's something that the consumer isn't going to see but will appreciate the cross compatibility and longevity and R&D, why not keep things as is and keep these consistent between product lines? Okay, and it was the same philosophy that the Russians implemented when they transitioned from the AK-74M, or not really transitioned, but began to manufacture AK-100 series rifles on those same military lines. They said, why reinvest a whole bunch of money into retooling for older tech when we can keep that thinner AK-74 style bolt, stem design, and change a few of the geometric surfaces inside just to make sure that the 7.62x39 has an easy time working in that rifle. And they saved a butt ton of money doing that and allowed them to continue to manufacture on those same lines. Now, whether or not the bolt carrier group dimensional differences are enough to create a vast improvement in longevity between the AK-100 series and the standard AKM, I'm not really sure. I think that personally, with an AKM being properly built, having a very, very long service life, kind of splitting hairs at that point doesn't really matter. Now, what about the KUSA KR-103? This is the bolt carrier group, and as you can see, well, maybe with some up-close footage, the bolt stem is very closely resembling that of an AK-74, and this mirrors pretty much exactly my Russian AK-103. You have that thinner bolt stem, you have that claw-style extractor, which is almost identical to an AK-74 extractor, albeit with some very slight dimensional differences near the bolt face, and a extractor retaining pin, firing pin retaining pin, and firing pin that are all shared with the AK-74 and AK-103. The piston is screwed into place and then dimpled, rather than drilled and riveted. And the front piston does not have those cuts in it, those vertical cuts in the piston head as we see at AKMs and in the Palmetto State Armory rifle. Of note, this is also shared with the SGL-20. One of the few key differences between an AKM and an AK-103 is the inclusion of a bump rivet in the front trunnion. Now that bump rivet is present on the K103. It is not present on the PSA AK-103 because again, the bolt geometry is that of an AKM and it's not necessary. Now between the PSA AK-103 and the KR-103, there are some slight cosmetic differences receiver forward. Starting with the rear sight block, what you see on the KR-103 is that of an AK-103. It has, some dimensional differences. It has a 1,000 meter rear sight, which is very optimistic for 7.62 by 39. And it also has a gas tube lever that is the new and improved reinforced variety. Forward of that, you have a spring tensioned gas tube, which adds a little bit of rigidity and to reduce some of the wiggle or play that's, commonly found in well-used AKs. And again, that's not really present in the Palmetto State Armory PSA AK-103. The PSA rifle has what appears to be a standard AKM rear sight block, as well as an 800 meter rear sight. The gas tube is AKM, the handguard retainer is AKM, and the front sight base is AK-74 spec. Now this is in direct contrast to the KUSA KR-103, which has a AK-103 lower handguard retainer and AK-103 front sight base. Again, these are just some slight cosmetic differences, not a whole lot of functional differences. From a materials perspective, the Palmetto State Armory rifle knocks it out of the park. They have a cold hammer forged and chrome lined barrel by FN and a 4340 ordnance grade steel front trunnion and bolt carrier group. Those are all hammer forged. Where the Palmetto State Armory rifle suffers is in the quality control department. This particular rifle has a very loose gas tube lever, and you can see I can actuate that with my finger. This will sometimes go loose while firing, and it's a pain in the butt. This is not just relegated to the AK-103, it's more of an endemic issue. I have a PSA AK-104 that was just recently sent back for a similar issue. And this kind of gets into one of the issues that I found with the AK-103 that I have yet to send back to Palmetto State Armory for. The AK-104, although it was unfired, I received it and saw that the gas tube lever was too loose and decided, I'm just going to send it out, along with the magazine compatibility issue that is found on the AK-103. I figured before I even get to shooting it, let's just have them fix it and get it out of the way. Now, PSA replaced the bolt on my AK-104 without me really knowing that there was anything wrong with it. They said that it was replaced, re-headspaced, test fired, and then re-serialized to the gun. Apparently, that bolt had a firing pin issue. Unfortunately, this PSA 103 also has what appears to be a firing pin issue. Now, whether or not that's an issue with the firing pin or the firing pin channel inside the bolt, I'm not sure. Regardless, the AK-104's bolt had to be replaced entirely. The problem that I have with the PSA AK-103 is that the firing pin depth continues to shrink. After about the 500 round mark, I started noticing light primer strikes. Unfortunately, that pin is not sticking out deep enough in the bolt face. Here's a little close-up video. Now you can see here that the PSA AK-103 firing pin sticks out a little less than that of the KUSA rifle. Both have about 600 rounds through them. When I disassembled the bolt, I found shreds of primer material inside the firing pin channel. This is an issue that we've seen across the forums and on Reddit. Unfortunately, it seems like this is a very common problem. Now, as you can see, the Kalashnikov USA rifle has a firing pin that jets out the correct amount in the bolt face. No problems at all impacting those rounds. There are another three issues that I found with the Palmetto State Armory rifle. One, the ejection pattern is very unpredictable. I'll have 3 or 4 rounds that are consistent and, like an AK should, be sent to the stratosphere, but, the 4th or 5th round, for whatever reason, will just barely poop out of the ejection port. It's kind of concerning. Issue number 2 is the fact that the Palmetto State Armory rifle is a little overgassed. Now, AKs in general are supposed to be overgassed. This one takes it up a notch. You can see the bolt velocity on both rifles with their ejection patterns and the dust covers off. You can see that the rear trunnion of the PSA rifle gets beat up a little harsher, and that translates to more recoil perceived by the shooter. This is unfortunately not just an AK-103 problem from the PSA line of rifles. This also includes some of their AKMs. I've fired a few of their PSA GF3s and GF4s, and I've dealt with the same issue. I feel like most of the rifles are a little on the gassy side. Now, it's an easy fix. They are AKM carriers after all, and so a K&S piston can drop right in. Should be an easy swap, but still, it would be nice if they closed up those gas ports just a little bit. Finally, the finish on the bolt carrier group of the Palmetto State Armory rifle is a little weaker than that of the KUSA. Again, both have comparable round counts, but for whatever reason, the bolt carrier group in the PSA rifle has a lot more of its finish missing, with a little more bare steel shown through the ejection port. It seems like the Palmetto State Armory bolt carrier group is black oxide coated in comparison to the KUSA bolt carrier group, which seems to be black nitride coated. Now, these are just assumptions made by me, but that's what it seems like. So what about the downsides of the KUSA KR-103? Well, for one, it doesn't really exhibit many of the issues that were found with the PSA AK-103, which is a good thing. Magazine compatibility is good to go. Didn't have any issues with the finish on the bolt carrier group. Didn't have any issues with a loose gas tube lever or erratic ejection or any of that other stuff. Now, one of the things that Kalashnikov USA can do a little better for the AK-103 that they manufacture is the barrel. As we talked about it, it's a button rifled chrome line barrel. Now, button rifling versus a hammer forged barrel, it's not that much of a difference when it comes to 7.62 by 39. It's a relatively slow round and it's not much of a barrel burner. But you know, that hammer forging process would be a little better of an upsell, I guess, and just adds that extra layer of longevity that would be nice to have. The other thing is the spot welds on the receiver. Those could be cleaned up a little bit, made to look a little nicer and a little more consistent and concise. Now, the biggest issue by far with the Kalashnikov USA KR-103 is the fact that the bolt is not serialized. Kalashnikov USA, I hope you're watching. With a heightened duty of care as a firearms manufacturer, you should fall in line with the industry standard, which is serializing the bolt. That is crucial, and it is a huge overstep and oversight if you don't do that. Say I purchase an AK-103 today and another AK-103 tomorrow, you know, maybe the nice side folding variety. I take them both out, I shoot them both, and I decide to clean them both. Well, if those bolts are not serialized and I decide to be a dingus that day, I could swap those bolts. They could fit into the rifle just fine, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the headspace is good and taken care of. And when it comes to playing around with bolts and AKs, you can't just really drop another bolt into another rifle without checking the headspace. If you don't, the results might be disastrous and explosive. So please, KUSA, if you're watching this, serialize your bolts. Now finally, what about accuracy? Both rifles performed adequately for AKs. I saw between 2 to 4 MOA at 100 yards using a variety of ammunition. For whatever reason, the Russian rifle preferred Barnaul ammunition and the PSA preferred Vimpel or Golden Tiger. Golden Tiger by far in all my other AKs is the most inconsistent ammo, but for whatever reason it pulled a really nice 2-inch group out of this FN barrel. Not so well in the KUSA. Now, both of these rifles are going to ring steel just fine, so I think accuracy is good enough for an AK. Now, which rifle would I pick? I think it's very clear I would pick the KUSA KR-103. Comes in a few bucks cheaper than the Palmetto State Armory rifle, and it doesn't really exhibit any of those issues, at least my example doesn't. Now, in comparison to my SGL-20 and my SGL-21, this rifle is damn near identical. Their execution and how they came out with this rifle was absolutely perfect, or as close to perfect as you can be in this industry. And so I would definitely stick with this guy. It's not wildly overgassed. I don't have any magazine compatibility issues. My gas tube lever doesn't bounce around, and my sights are pretty straight. So I think it's a damn good value for an AK-103. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you want to support Lead and Steel, head over to lead-steel.com. We would be humbled to have your business. Thanks and take care.